The Book of Mormon has a warning that has sometimes been used by people, by Mormon apologists objecting to what we criticize about the translations, where Mormon writes, if there be faults in this record, they be the faults of a man. And I confronted one of the apologists who made this objection when I raised some questions about how the translation problems in the Book of Mormon. And he cited me this verse. And I pointed out to him, this is Mormon writing about the words that he is putting down on the plates. It is not applied to the translation that was made by divine power. No, I never heard from him that. One thing I think we need to remember in any kind of discussion about Mormonism is this crucial passage from the Doctrine and Covenants. It is not the work of God that is frustrated, but the work of man. So if you find some problem with something that claims to be the work of God, then it's not the work of God. Here is an example where the Mormon apologists have actually done so. They have denied that. They have said these are incorrect translations. And you're familiar with all of these. The horse is not a horse. A horse, in spite of the popular song, a horse is a horse. The chariot is the sledge or some kind of thing that the Indians drag behind them. North is really west, if you are a limited geography proponent, because it doesn't work if with the land northward and the land southward. According to that theory, it's the land westward and the land southward. The plates of gold were not really gold, they were some metal called tumbaga, which is a copper alloy. And that steel swords are really wooden mahihuacos, which was a weapon used by the Mesoamerican natives. And that a narrow neck of land is really not a narrow neck, it's 160 miles wide at the SS of Tehuantepec. And remember that if that is true, the people who described that piece of narrow neck came from a country that was only about 100 miles long. Well, let's move on. There are a lot of documents in the history of the world, both religious and non-religious and secular, that claim to be by somebody, but they're not really by that person. They're called pseudographs. They are purporting to be by somebody, often somebody very, very ancient, in order to give it some kind of authority. The donation of Constantine, for example, is a well-known historical example of such a pseudepigraph, or the Songs of Ossian. You any familiar with the Songs of Ossian? It was a guy who, in England, who made up a bunch of ancient Celtic poems from a legendary poet, Ossian, and he published them, and they were very, very popular in the early 19th century, and people took them to be genuine, and it turned out he just made them up. Well, let's go on. The last part of Isaiah, for example, is a pseudepigraph. According to most biblical scholars, the first part of Isaiah is written by the prophet named Isaiah, so far as we can tell. But the last part, obviously, is not. So it's somebody else writing at a later time, and that's how we recognize it, is because of the anachronisms, and I'll talk about that in a moment. The book of Daniel is especially interesting to Mormons, I think, because it's what I call the Bible's Book of Mormon. It has so much in common, the book of Daniel, with the Book of Mormon. It was sealed up. Are you familiar with the book of Daniel in the Old Testament? Okay. It was sealed up to be brought forth in the last days, just like the Book of Mormon. It was it contained prophecies of the future. And of course, what it said was, by saying this book will come forth, will be sealed up until it comes forth in the last days, and I'm talking about the book of Daniel now, would mean that when the book came forth, that wasn't the last days. You know when the book of Daniel came forth? About 165 BC. So it wasn't the last days. Also, the book of Daniel contained numerous linguistic and historical anachronisms and downright errors. Does that sound like the Book of Mormon? So that's why I call the book of Daniel the Old Testament's Book of Mormon. And the epistles of Peter, the 1st and 2nd Peter, those are obviously pseudographs. Apostle Peter was long dead when those epistles appeared, and they are not in the style of Greek that a poor Aramaic fisherman would have been writing. And some of the apostles of Paul are also pseudographs. The way we identify pseudographs is often by recognizing anachronisms. And I'll illustrate what anachronism is. This is a typed copy from a written document, book, that unfortunately no longer exists, but we have the typed copy, the Journal of General George Washington. And it's something that I found among my grandfather's papers, and it's fascinating because nobody has ever seen it before, but it has interesting information. It talks about things that we know are correct about the life of George Washington. It tells some things that we didn't know, but they seem to make sense. Then we come across this passage. This afternoon received an urgent wire, took the railroad train to Philadelphia, arrived toward evening, met by Mr. Adams at the station. Well, now, what strikes you right there? There were no railroad trains in Washington's time. There was no wire. There's no station, you know. Now, if you were a member of the apologists who were defending this document, and they said, well, maybe wire was a word that George Washington used to mean a message, you know? It wasn't what we think of as wire. It's what, that's the problem. That is, nobody else was using the word wire in that sense. We find no other examples of the use of that word in that meaning. And the same for railroad train, and the same for station. Those are anachronisms of things. Those things did not exist. There are also linguistic anachronisms. For example, we also find later on a passage, Colonel Wright suspects a British fifth column working in the Carolinas. Now, what strikes you out about that? If you know anything about the history of various languages and vocabulary, and you look up the term fifth column, it's a term that was invented during the Spanish Civil War in the 1930s. And so there's no way that George Washington could have been using that. Now, suppose I were to tell you, well, this is only 2-3 little anachronisms. Does that really matter? I mean, 99%. Well, I hope you would say, no, it looks to me like fraud. But here's the clincher. Suppose an angel appeared to me and told me that this was authentic George Washington. Would the angel story make a difference? I would hope not.